welcome back. This is a place for quiet stories from the wizarding world. The paths Canon never walked. The choices that might have changed everything. Here we take a single moment and turn it slightly. We follow the consequences. Slowly, carefully, year by year. If you enjoy these long, immersive journeys into alternate magic, consider subscribing and settling in. Now, let's start. In the canonical timeline, scholars and survivors chart his destiny through Dark Lords and Deathly Hallows, through Horcruxes and hallways soaked in war. They debate bloodlines, wand lore, and the metaphysics of sacrifice, as if destiny were a spell one could diagram on a blackboard. Almost no one asks the quieter question, what emotion, hidden and unspoken, was actually steering his hand each time he stepped into danger. In this timeline, the missing variable is not a relic or a prophecy fragment. It is an 11-year-old boy's first, fierce, protective attachment to the girl who knocks on his compartment door and changes his world with a single, unapologetic, "Have you seen a toad?" Harry does not have language for it. He barely has language for friendship. But from that moment, something in him orients toward Hermione Granger with a primitive intensity of soul resonance. Not romance as adults name it, a gravitational pull. We propose a simple divergence with tactically lethal consequences. Harry falls in love with Hermione before he knows what love is. That one feeling quietly rewires his decision-making architecture, from the troll in the bathroom to the final walk into the forest. Every corridor becomes a potential battlefield, not just for the safety of the world, but for the safety of one girl who becomes his private North Star. The external world remains the same. Same prophecy, same Dark Lord, same castle on the Scottish horizon rising like a fortress out of the mist. But internally, the axis shifts. Harry still laughs with Ron, still bickers and bonds, yet he listens to Hermione with a different weight, treating her logic as authority, her fear as alarm bells, her pain as an unacceptable cost. Her plans are no longer merely clever. They are the operating system of his survival instinct. This is not a romance fantasy. It is a forensic investigation. We will move year by year through Hogwarts, dissecting how an unspoken crush destabilizes the Golden Trio, converts study sessions into strategic councils, and turns time-turner loops into intimate war rooms, where Ron is conspicuously absent. We will ask whether a triangle can bear the weight of a war without cracking. Because love is a weapon being polished in the dark. It can anchor Harry, make him more disciplined, more cautious, more inclined to use Hermione's intellect as a shield against reckless heroics. It can also isolate Ron, poison trust, and offer Voldemort a sharper, more human target than any riddle carved into a prophecy sphere. In choosing Hermione, silently, stubbornly, Harry may save more lives, or he may break the trio before it ever becomes legend, and change the ending of the war beyond recognition. Halloween, Hogwarts Express, and a glance that changes everything. The fracture line does not begin with prophecy or basilisk fangs, or a time-turner spinning like a trapped star. It begins in a train compartment on a grey September morning in 1991, with a bossy girl and a boy who has never once been safe. In canon, the Hogwarts Express is played as gentle comedy, Ron's nerves, Scabbers' spell, Hermione's interruption. They are wrong. In this timeline, the moment Hermione Granger slides open that compartment door is treated with the gravity of a declaration of war, because for Harry it is the first incursion of methodical certainty into a life ruled by chaos. She arrives exactly as the books remember her. Breathless, hair escaping its constraints, voice already halfway into an apology and a lecture. She fills the doorway with questions and authority. Has anyone seen a toad? She's already tried several spells. She's read all the course books. She's practiced a few charms for luck. Ron hears condescension. Harry hears fluency. Here is someone who speaks the language of this new world as if it were her native tongue. For a child raised in emotional famine, Hermione's competence does not read as arrogance. It reads as infrastructure. Every fact she rattles off, every casual reference to Hogwarts, a history, every correction of Ron's pronunciation sketches the outline of a fortress he might live inside. She is not merely a clever classmate. She is a map. So when Ron mutters about her being a nightmare, the laugh that canon assigns to Harry never quite arrives. Instead, there is a pause, a small internal recoil, and an almost imperceptible defense. A change of subject, a softer tone when he answers her, an instinctive refusal to join in the mockery. When she leaves, he watches the empty doorway one heartbeat too long, as if expecting the world to collapse back into privet drive the moment her presence is removed. This is the first anchor. Not a grand oath, not a spoken promise, but a quiet soul resonance. The dawning conviction that if anyone can guide him through the dark machinery of magic, it is the girl who already knows the rules and is unafraid to wield them. A weapon being polished in the dark is dangerous. A weapon with a guiding hand is tactically lethal. By Halloween 1991, that anchor has sunk deeper than Harry understands. Hermione's corrections in class, her raised hand, her impatience with laziness, each friction point that canon frames as irritation becomes, in this timeline, further proof that she is reliable in a way adults have never been. Annoying, yes, but predictably annoying. Stable, so when the troll is loosed into the castle and the corridors erupt into panic, the calculus shifts. He is not only a Gryffindor first year chasing after a classmate, he is a boy whose fragile sense of safety has been attached to a single person. Fear converts into reckless courage with terrifying efficiency. Losing house points, breaking rules, even dying in a bathroom of cracked tiles and stinking water, these are acceptable costs measured against the prospect of Hermione's absence. The canon narrative will later insist that the trio is forged in that bathroom, equal parts fear and gratitude. In this Slytherin timeline of the heart, something narrower and more dangerous is forged instead. Harry's private, unspoken vow that the girl who makes the world make sense will not be taken from him. The first anchor is set, and every decision from this night on will drag a few degrees off the path we thought we knew. The war has not begun, but its trajectory has already changed. The troll, the bathroom, and the birth of a secret vow. Halloween night does not become legendary in this timeline because of a mountain troll in a girl's bathroom. It becomes legendary because, for the first time, Harry Potter tastes the specific terror of losing Hermione Granger. The moment Quirrell bursts into the Great Hall, stammering about a troll in the dungeons, canon insists that chaos and confusion rule. They are wrong. What rules? Harry is a single. Cold realization as he watches Hermione's empty place at the table and remembers the way her voice had broken when she fled. He hurt her. He left her alone. And now the castle itself has turned into a predator hunting the one person who makes the world make sense. Guilt is there, yes, but it is swallowed by something sharper. Possessive fear. So when Ron mutters that she doesn't know about the troll, Harry does not hesitate, does not wait for a teacher, does not even pretend to deliberate. He stands. He moves. The decision is already made in the marrow. In canon, Ron drags him into heroism. In this Slytherin timeline of the heart, Harry is the one who seizes Ron's sleeve and pulls. He cuts through the panicked crowds with methodical certainty, ignoring prefects' shouts, calculating shortcuts through side corridors, not because he is tactically lethal, but because every second is a coin paid against the image of Hermione's body on cold stone. When they reach the bathroom and the door groans open, the scene is familiar and newly terrible. Shattered sinks. The reek of troll. Hermione, small and cornered beneath that obscene club. But where Canon Harry improvises, this Harry is reckless with a purpose. He does not think of points or expulsion. He thinks only of interposing his body between hers and the descending weapon. His oi pea-brain is not bravado, it is a prayer disguised as an insult, a desperate bid to redirect death. He charges too close, pushes Ron to act faster, takes risks that would be suicidal if not for the clumsy luck of 11-year-olds and the structural incompetence of trolls. The club falls. The troll collapses. Silence descends like a curtain. In that silence, Hermione's eyes find his first. She is shaking, tear-streaked, furious at herself for needing rescue. And then McGonagall arrives, and the script diverges again. Hermione lies. She claims it was her fault that she went looking for the troll, that Harry and Ron saved her. On paper, it is the same alibi. In Harry's chest, it lands like a spell of binding. She is the rule keeper, the prefect in waiting, the girl who believes in the fortress of authority, and she has just set fire to her spotless record to shield him. A masterpiece to be moulded is often born in battlefields and council chambers. Here, it is born in a flooded bathroom, in the sole resonance between a girl who breaks her own code and a boy who realizes he has become her exception. That night, in his four-poster bed, curtains drawn against the murmur of the dormitory, Harry shapes this into a vow. No wand movement, no incantation, just a promise carved into the dark. He will stand between Hermione and danger. Always. Rules are negotiable. Detentions are irrelevant. Teachers, even Dumbledore, are advisory at best when measured against her safety. It is a private oath, but it has the clean, cold edges of war. The trio still forms, but the geometry is skewed. Outwardly, they are equal. Inwardly, Harry orbits Hermione's safety and approval first, and Ron orbits Harry. It is a tiny imbalance, invisible in first-year laughter, yet it is already a fault line, waiting for pressure, jealousy, and prophecy to turn it into a fracture. And the next time danger comes hunting, that fault line will decide who Harry is willing to betray. Year 1 rewired, a weaponized crush in Philosopher's Stone. Year 1 rewires itself in the quietest of places, the classroom seating chart. In this timeline, Harry does not drift to whatever empty chair is nearest Ron. He calculates with the blunt, instinctive strategy of a child who has survived neglect, that the safest place in this new world is the desk next to Hermione Granger. He does not copy her homework. That would feel like theft. Instead, he copies her habits, and the imitation is almost devotional. When she writes everything down, he starts mirroring her cramped, furious note-taking until his parchment is dense enough to be a shield. When she raises her hand, he forces himself to follow, heart hammering, because the fear of looking foolish is for once weaker than the desire to be worthy in her eyes. The library stops being an intimidating fortress of silence and becomes their shared terrain. If Hermione is there, then knowledge is not abstract. It is proximity. Classroom by classroom, this crush becomes a training regimen. Potions is still a war zone under Snape's authority, but Harry watches how Hermione tracks instructions like battle orders and survives. Transfiguration turns into a private competition he never admits aloud. If she can master the matchstick to needle spell in 3 tries, he will do it in 4, not 20. The boy who once coasted on talent begins, without language for it, to weaponize discipline, because excellence is the only currency he believes might buy him her continued attention. That shift collides directly with the stone mystery. Canon Harry barrels toward danger on instinct and moral outrage. This Harry has an extra axis of calculation. What does Hermione think? When she is uneasy about Snape, he does not dismiss it as paranoia. He interrogates it. He asks her, weeks earlier than in canon, to walk him through every oddity: Quirrell's stutter, the troll, the 3-headed dog. Their investigation acquires a strange, almost academic quality. She outlines hypotheses. He stress tests them against his memories and gut. Impulse is not erased, but it is filtered through her logic, and that filtration makes them methodical where they were once merely brave. The obstacle gauntlet at year's end becomes the purest expression of this dynamic. In the Slytherin timeline, we call it what it is: a field exam. Harry insists explicitly that Hermione lead the planning. Devil's snare, flying keys, giant chess. He steps back whenever the problem is cerebral, forcing himself to treat his own courage as a tool to be deployed only when her mind has mapped the terrain. By the time they reach Snape's logic puzzle, her triumph is not a surprise, but the culmination of a year in which he has quietly decided that her brain is a masterpiece to be molded, not merely admired. There is a cost. He hides the intensity of this reliance with almost paranoid care, terrified that Ron will see it and name it. Every time he defers to Hermione, he makes a joke, or shrugs, or pretends it was obvious. Every time he follows her into risk, he frames it as we and never you. The most important emotional truth of his first year, that Hogwarts is survivable because Hermione exists inside it, never crosses his lips. Silence becomes his first real occlumency, long before the word is taught. So when he finally stands before Quirrell and the mirror, the stakes are misdiagnosed by everyone watching from history's safe distance. They are wrong. Harry thinks he is protecting the stone, protecting the school, but beneath that, there is a narrower, fiercer calculation. If this dark man wins, the fragile, luminous future embodied by one bossy, brilliant girl collapses. That focused love gives him power enough to burn Voldemort's presence from Quirrell's body. It also marks him, to any true strategist, as a weapon being polished in the dark, precisely because his soul resonance can be mapped, targeted, and exploited. Second year, sharper edges, Hermione as target, Harry as blade. Second year begins with a quieter, sharper hunger. Harry is not merely fleeing Privet Drive. He is navigating the dead air between one letter from Hermione and the next, measuring out the summer in envelopes and ink. In this timeline, his correspondence with her becomes his first self-imposed discipline. Lines rewritten, crossings out burned, every anecdote about the Muggle world or the Dursleys curated to make her laugh, or at least to make her answer. Ron gets shorter, sloppier notes. That is not malice. It is triage. Hermione is the axis of his new world, and he behaves accordingly. When the Chamber of Secrets opens, the castle shifts from fortress to hunting ground. Each attack is not an abstract horror, but a tightening noose around one particular girl with bushy hair and a dangerous habit of being in the library alone. Harry's attention narrows with methodical certainty. He walks her to classes under the pretext of safety in numbers, lingers in doorways until she is physically inside the girl's dormitory, and adopts a permanent seat opposite her in the library, as if proximity itself could deflect curses. Teachers notice. McGonagall reads it as loyalty, then, increasingly, as a distraction. Ron reads it as an imbalance he cannot name. The Slytherin timeline taught us to watch how small social frictions prefigure war. Here, the friction is simple. Ron wants the old, chaotic trio back. Harry, without saying so, has already chosen a priority. The pattern interrupt comes on an ordinary afternoon. Harry arrives late to the library. Hermione is not there. The next time he sees her, she is on a hospital wing bed, eyes glassy, hand frozen around a scrap of mirror. Canon treats this as a mystery beat. They are wrong. For this Harry, it is an execution. His first anchor is gone. Not dead, but locked behind a pane of magical ice he cannot break. He sits beside her in the antiseptic silence, the ward feeling less like a sanctuary and more like an alpine mausoleum. And he talks. He tells the petrified Hermione about the cupboard, about the way her letters felt like contraband light, about how he walks faster when he knows she is waiting at the end of a corridor. He says things he would never dare voice if she could shift or blush or look away. She cannot hear. That is precisely why he can finally say them. Authority fractures here. Harry's grief crystallizes into contempt. Lockhart is not merely ridiculous, he is an insult to the concept of protection. McGonagall's caution is no longer wisdom but obstruction. Even Dumbledore's removal feels like abdication. When Ginny disappears, he does not go into the chamber as a Gryffindor hero saving a stranger. He descends as a boy who has already lost his chosen future once and is unwilling to let the same dark resonance claim another girl. The basilisk falls. Riddle dissolves. None of it matters until the mandrake draught is brewed and Hermione's chest finally rises in a conscious breath. His relief is almost violent. He grips the bed rail hard enough to hurt, because the world has just demonstrated how easily it can take her and hold her in perfect, helpless stillness. In that moment, a private, dangerous conclusion settles with icy clarity. If she is this vulnerable, then he cannot afford to remain soft. What walks out of the hospital wing is still Harry Potter, but the edges are sharper. A masterpiece to be moulded has found its first, unshakable premise. Power is not optional when love can be targeted. And the next time the dark comes hunting, he intends to be tactically lethal. The trio tilts. Ron's place in a quietly lopsided triangle. What walks back into Gryffindor Tower is sharper, yes, but it still walks between Ron and Hermione. On the surface, the Golden Trio reforms with almost canonical ease. Homework crises, Quidditch commentary, chess by the fire. To the watching world, nothing fundamental has shifted. They are wrong. In this timeline, the axis has tilted. The laughter remains, but in arguments about rules, risk, and what constitutes a good idea, Harry's weight drops, almost imperceptibly, on Hermione's side. When she insists they revise for McGonagall, he backs her. When she warns that sneaking out again is reckless, his silence lengthens, then aligns with her methodical certainty. Ron finds himself outvoted 2-1, not by logic, he is used to that, but by Harry's quiet, unspoken allegiance. The joke, more and more often, is on him. The humiliation is rarely loud. It is a study session where Ron grumbles that Hermione is overreacting about a rule, and Harry, instead of mediating, calmly reinforces her point with a practical example. It is a Scabbers versus Crookshanks dispute in miniature. Hermione argues from evidence, Ron from emotion, and Harry, who once would have split the difference, now leans into Hermione's reasoning with a seriousness that leaves Ron blinking. The Fortress of Three is still standing, but a hairline crack has appeared along one red-haired fault line. Ron feels it before he understands it. He notices the way Harry's gaze lingers on Hermione in class, when she raises her hand for the 20th time, not with exasperation, but with a quiet, almost reverent focus. He registers, without language for it, that Harry bristles faster when someone mocks her teeth or her know-it-all reputation than when they insult him. When choices present themselves, whose opinion to ask first? Whose plan to follow? Harry's instinctive turn is toward Hermione. A seed of rivalry is planted long before dress robes and Yule Ball invitations give it a name. Harry, for his part, is not blind. He knows Ron's lifelong war with being overshadowed, with hand-me-downs and second-hand praise. So he begins to curate himself. In public, he amplifies Ron's Quidditch insights, laughs a little louder at his jokes. lets him take the lead in Gryffindor strategy talk. In private, behind library shelves, under the invisibility cloak, in whispered late-night planning, he lets his real center of gravity show, building plans with Hermione as if they are two halves of a single, humming soul resonance. This double life cannot help but generate flashpoints. Ron walking in on an intense, low-voiced Harry-Hermione discussion about Sirius, time-turners, or polyjuice, only to have them fall abruptly silent. A corridor argument where Harry, pushed to choose, backs Hermione so firmly that Ron's face closes like a slammed door. Each moment is small, deniable, easy to plaster over with a joke, but glass remembers every fracture. Under the pressure to come, time-turners looping nights without Ron, the Yule Ball forcing desire into formal wear, Horcruxes gnawing at sanity, that lopsided triangle will not stay theoretical. It will either be reforged into a new geometry of loyalty or shatter in a way that leaves someone standing alone in the dark. And the next time Ron is asked to choose between his pride and Harry's authority, the answer will not be automatic. Year 3 alone together, time-turners, trust, and intimacy. By third year, the triangle has already warped. The world still speaks of the golden trio as if they are a balanced equation. They are wrong. In this timeline, the gravitational center has shifted quietly toward a partnership that looks less like schoolyard friendship and more like a provisional marriage conducted under adolescent camouflage. The shift announces itself in timetables and in silence. Hermione's schedule becomes an impossibility on parchment, and Harry, already attuned to her in a way Ron is not, spots the fracture lines first, the trembling hands over toast, the ink smudges on her wrists, the way she forgets to eat when the library becomes a fortress against her own ambition. So he recalibrates. He lingers after classes he does not need, engineers his routes so they intersect with hers, presses sandwiches into her hands without commentary. This is not chivalry. It is methodical certainty, the instinctive logistics of someone who has decided that one person's well-being is non-negotiable. Their one-on-one moments begin as accidents and harden into ritual. Shared detentions with Snape become a laboratory for unspoken coordination. One distracts, the other completes the task, and both leave with a private sense of victory. Study sessions stretch late, parchment giving way to conversations about fear that 13-year-olds are not supposed to articulate. Hermione speaking haltingly about parents who live in a world that cannot imagine Dementors. Harry dissecting the hollow shape of a family that exists only in photographs and other people's stories. Ron is often missing, siphoned off by Quidditch gossip or twin-engineered chaos, and the absence does not feel like a gap so much as a curtain. Behind it, an emotional world is being built with methodical bricks. When the firebolt arrives, that world buckles. Hermione's report to McGonagall is a betrayal with legal precedent. But in this darker emotional economy, it hits like treason. Canon Harry explodes. This Harry implodes first. Because he loves her, the anger folds inward into analysis. Was he reckless? Was the broom a weapon? Had he forced her into the role of his keeper? The silence between them is not childish sulking. It is a temporary Cold War, a test of whether soul resonance can survive ideological fracture. Their reconciliation, when Buckbeak's execution looms, is correspondingly sharper, almost tactically lethal in its honesty. Apologies traded like oaths, not like casual words. Then the night fractures. The time turner is revealed, and the secret that had been eroding Hermione from the inside becomes the mechanism that welds them together. Moving through time, they function as a single organism. Hermione calculating angles and intervals, Harry executing with battlefield obedience, hiding in the trees as their past selves play out the script, racing to free Buckbeak, standing inches apart as Dementors swarm the lake. This is a quasi-date conducted under mortal threat, a rehearsal for war leadership where the only constant is that he trusts her timing more than his own instincts. By the end of year 3, Harry's internal map has been redrawn. Survival, Quidditch, even Sirius as a reclaimed father figure, all of it orbits a new axis, the belief that he and Hermione together can literally rewrite time. It is intoxicating. It is dangerous. Because once you have watched the world break and then step backward with a girl you love at your side, the idea of accepting any future you did not design feels less like humility and more like surrender. And Harry James Potter has never surrendered willingly. The 4th year will test that nascent authority. The maze, the Yule Ball, the graveyard. Each will ask whether this partnership is an anchor or a vulnerability, and whether the boy who trusted Hermione with time itself will trust her with power. Authority reframed. Dumbledore, Lupin, and a Harry who loves differently. Authority, once accepted as a given, becomes negotiable the moment you love someone more than you fear being wrong. In this timeline, Harry's quiet, unspoken allegiance is no longer to Hogwarts or the boy who lived myth, or even Dumbledore's war. It is to Hermione Granger. That shift is most visible with Remus Lupin. Canon remembers a lonely boy dazzled by the first competent defense professor he's ever had. They are wrong. Here, Hermione's almost reverent admiration for Lupin's lessons doesn't just make Harry like him, it makes Harry study him, the way one might study the warding on a fortress that now shelters what you cannot lose. He notices the tremor in Lupin's hands after full moons, the fatigue in his eyes when Hermione stays late to ask questions, and he intervenes, gently but firmly, when her eagerness starts to look like self-sacrifice. Praise becomes permission. Harry insists on limits. Lupin, in turn, becomes the first adult Harry interrogates with methodical certainty. Not hostile, but precise. More questions about the Marauders, about the First War, about how a world that produced James and Lily also produced Azkaban and the Lestranges. He is no longer collecting stories for their own sake. He is mapping the terrain of the war Hermione is already walking into, searching for every contour that might cut her. The past is no longer nostalgia. It is threat assessment. Dumbledore feels the difference even more acutely. The headmaster is accustomed to a boy who will step into danger because the abstract greater good hums like a distant noble melody. Here, that melody is drowned out by a closer, sharper resonance. Hermione's safety. When Dumbledore offers vague instructions, "Trust me, You must not know yet. Harry does not explode in adolescent fury. He pauses, calculates, and asks the only question that matters. Is Hermione at risk because I don't know? If the answer is anything but a clear no, compliance becomes negotiation. The Slytherin timeline taught us what a weapon being polished in the dark looks like. This Harry is gentler, but the same strategic spine is there. Hermione herself becomes a filter through which authority must pass. Before, Harry's instincts about adults were reactive, emotional. In this timeline, they are triangulated. If Hermione dismisses Trelawney as theatrically incompetent, Harry's skepticism hardens into policy. No life decisions based on prophecy-shaped theatrics. If she is wary of Snape, his hatred cools from impulsive rage into structured opposition, focused on documenting unfair treatment, shielding her from humiliation, and quietly pushing back where the system will actually feel it. The divergence sharpens the moment Dumbledore withholds critical truths about Sirius, about the prophecy, about the scale of the coming war. Canon Harry feels personally betrayed. This Harry feels that Hermione has been left exposed, forced to operate in the dark while others hoard illumination. Betrayal becomes dereliction of duty. The silence around the prophecy is not just an insult to his agency, it is a direct threat to hers, and that hardens something in him that will not soften again. By the end of third year, adults are no longer saviors. They are variables. Lupin is a wounded asset, Snape a hostile constant, Dumbledore an unstable source of power and information. Harry begins to plan with a tactically lethal clarity, whose non-negotiable core is simple. Hermione survives. Every mission, every secret, every alliance is measured against that axiom. The war has not yet fully arrived, but the negotiation of power has. And when Voldemort finally steps out of myth, he will find not a child waiting for orders, but a strategist who has already chosen his first and final priority. And that priority will not yield even to prophecy. Goblet of Fire ignited, jealousy, the Yule Ball, and Crumb. By fourth year, the war has not yet arrived, but the battlefield has shifted. The Triwizard Tournament does not merely threaten Harry's life. In this timeline, it threatens the only future he has ever quietly allowed himself to imagine. One where Hermione Granger survives the war and, impossibly, chooses him. When his name erupts from the goblet, the hall freezes. Canon insists his horror is about dragons, mazes, and death. They are wrong. Beneath the shock is a cold of fear that Hermione will look at him and see recklessness, incompetence, a boy who cannot control even the magic that nominates him. His first instinct is not to protest to Dumbledore. It is to find her eyes, to measure whether her faith has fractured. Every training session, every strategy session becomes an audition. He must be brave, yes, but more than that, he must be credible in her judgment. This is where Cho Chang enters not as a singular blinding crush, but as a mirror that refuses to cooperate. Harry notices her, of course. The Quidditch grace, the quiet smile, but her image never stands alone. It is always held against Hermione, the girl who faced a troll for him, rewrote his homework, and sat in the hospital wing while he recovered. Attraction to Cho feels like a betrayal of that long, slow soul resonance with Hermione, and so his interest is hesitant, guilty, permanently second-guessed. The Yule Ball detonates this equilibrium. When Hermione descends the staircase on Victor Krumm's arm, Harry does not register mild surprise at his friend's transformation. He experiences a tactical failure. Other boys have seen what he has been hoarding in silence. Krumm, international seeker and living symbol of power, has moved on the board while Harry was still pretending the game did not exist. The sight of Hermione laughing at Krumm's low-voiced comment is not simply painful. It is a revelation that his supposed secret love is neither safe nor private. Desire, he realizes, is a contested field. His behavior with Cho warps accordingly. In canon, he dithers. Here, the dithering is deliberate self-sabotage. He approaches her, rehearses the question, then hears Hermione's voice in his memory correcting his spell work, arguing about house elves, telling him not to be reckless. How can he fully commit to asking Cho when some irrational part of him is waiting for Hermione to turn from Krumm, to look back across the hall and choose him without ever having been asked? His silence becomes its own cowardice, a weapon being polished in the dark, turned against himself. After the ball, the fortress of the castle feels oddly hollow. Ron rages. Hermione explodes. The canonical argument unfolds. But Harry hears a different subtext entirely. Hermione is not just furious at being treated as an afterthought. She is articulating the cost of waiting for boys to grow up. Lying awake later, Harry replays not only her anger at Ron, but her easy laughter with Krumm. The way she did not once look to Harry for rescue or validation. For the first time, he understands with methodical certainty that this love story can end before it ever begins. Not through tragedy, but through inaction. That knowledge follows him into every subsequent task, into the maze itself, turning each choice into a referendum on whether he will finally act or continue to retreat. And when the hedges close, when the world narrows to green walls and distant screams, the question of who he is fighting for and what he is willing to confess will no longer be theoretical. Fire and water, tasks, trauma, and who Harry saves first. In this maze of shifting hedges and whispered horrors, the real crucible has already happened. It began the moment Harry realized that every task is not just a test of skill, but a referendum on whether Hermione Granger walks out of this year alive. Rewind to the first task. In canon, Harry is terrified of dying. Here, that fear is braided to a sharper terror, that if he missteps, he leaves Hermione alone in a world that has dragons on the front page and Death Eaters in the margins. The dragon is no longer just an obstacle. It is a preview of the war he knows with methodical certainty is coming. Under that pressure, he does something he has always resisted. He lets Hermione in. Fully. He takes her notes on summoning charms without protest, drills under her supervision until his arm aches, and refuses to joke away his anxiety in front of her. His pride bends around his fear of her grief. The boy who lived becomes, quietly, a weapon being polished in the dark, by her hands as much as his own. The second task exposes that private truth to the world. When he breaks the surface of the Black Lake and sees the hostages suspended in eerie, swaying silence, his eyes go first to Ron by habit, but they lock on Hermione and do not move. The realization hits like cold water in his lungs. The tournament, this absurd spectacle of authority and risk, has named her as someone's most precious. It does not matter that she is technically Krum's hostage. In this timeline, Harry hears a public confession embedded in the staging. The world thinks it is watching champions. They are wrong. What it is actually watching is Harry Potter seeing his deepest, most carefully buried attachment turned into a prop. His decision to save everyone shifts accordingly. In canon, it reads as moral instinct. Here, it is defiance. Harry will not rank them. He will not swim away from Krum's hostage while Hermione hangs inches from his hand. Will not let judges, clocks, or merpeople decide whose life is worth more of his breath. Dragging both Ron and Gabrielle toward the surface, he is not just being noble. He is refusing the premise that love, loyalty, and friendship must be triaged. The lake wanted a hierarchy. It gets a rebellion. And then the graveyard tears the thin fabric of schoolyard danger completely. When he returns from Voldemort's resurrection, shaking and bloodstained, his first coherent need is not to debrief Dumbledore or reassure the crowd. It is to find Hermione. The hug in the hospital wing in canon is already intense. Here, it is a collision. She hits him at speed, arms around his neck, and he clings back with white-knuckled desperation, as if letting go means being dragged back to that stone altar. Her voice, babbling questions and apologies into his shoulder, becomes an anchor, dragging him out of shock, rethreading his soul resonance to the living world. In that moment, she stops being simply his clever friend. She becomes his post-trauma fortress. Ron sees all of it. The way Harry's eyes track Hermione around the infirmary, the way she hovers, refilling his water, arguing with Madame Pomfrey, snapping at anyone who tries to move him before he is ready. Ron's jokes die on his tongue when Harry does not look away from her. A fracture line opens, thin but real. Next year, when Umbridge and the Ministry begin their smear campaign, that sense of being peripheral will be a tactically lethal weakness. For Harry and Hermione, the war has already begun. For Ron, it will feel like he is arriving late to a battle that has quietly redefined what the trio even is. And as fifth year dawns, that imbalance will not fade. It will be exploited. Order of the Phoenix, a war room for two. The imbalance is exploited first in a house that already feels like a fortress under siege. Grimmauld Place, in this timeline, is not just a safe house. It is a pressure cooker where Harry's anger echoes off Blackstone and old magic until it has to land somewhere. It lands on Hermione. From the moment he storms through the door, shut out by Dumbledore and flayed by the Ministry's headlines, Harry is a weapon being polished in the dark by rage and humiliation. They are wrong. He thinks of the Prophet, of Fudge, of everyone who calls him unstable. And yet he is unstable, because for the first time, he has more pain than places to put it. Hermione becomes that place. He vents to her with a rawness he has never permitted himself, not even with Sirius. The nightmares, the graveyard, the bone-deep terror he hides under sarcasm. She listens, argues, corrects, and holds the line. In the silence between their late-night conversations, a new authority forms. She is no longer just the clever friend. She is his emotional handler. This has consequences when Umbridge arrives. In canon, Dumbledore's army is an accident of Hermione's organizing and Harry's reluctant charisma. In this timeline, it is a conscious, co-authored project. Hermione drafts schedules, charters, contingency plans. Harry designs combat progressions with methodical certainty, escalating from disarming charms to shield chains and coordinated flanking. They stand together at the Hog's Head, not as teacher and administrator, but as a dual command structure. When students look to the front of the room, their eyes move between them, calibrating to a shared center of gravity. Dumbledore feels that shift. For the first time, resistance at Hogwarts has a soul resonance that does not run exclusively through him. Into this enters Cho Chang, and Harry discovers that romance can feel like treason. Every stolen kiss in the Room of Requirement is haunted by the image of Hermione bent over parchment, refining rota lists so no one walks the corridors alone. When Cho wants him to dwell in grief, to circle Cedric's death like a wound that defines them, Harry finds himself arguing in Hermione's language: risk assessment, structural rot in the Ministry, the necessity of training. The fights are revealing. Cho wants a boy who will drown with her. Hermione is quietly teaching him how to swim against the current of the entire world. Hermione's influence does not erase his rage. It weaponizes it. When Umbridge carves his hand open, his first impulse is to burn her office to ash or force a showdown in the Great Hall. He does not stop because it is illegal. He stops because Hermione's face appears in the aftermath, in his mind, as collateral. Every reckless fantasy of storming the Ministry is now weighted by a single question. Does he leave her behind in safety, or drag her into the line of fire where he cannot guarantee her survival? His love becomes a brake on his worst impulses, and an accelerant on his strategic ones. But as the year darkens, that brake begins to feel like a fault line. The Ministry's smear campaign intensifies. Voldemort's visions twist his sleep into a nightly interrogation, and Harry starts to see the outline of a different danger. If he can feel Hermione this clearly, what happens the moment Voldemort notices? Is this bond his last tether to sanity, or the most exploitable weakness in the war to come? The Department of Mysteries. Love, lies, and a different rescue. The trap closes in a whisper, not a roar. The vision of Sirius writhing beneath Voldemort's wand does exactly what it is designed to do: detonate Harry's fear. But in this timeline, it slams directly into something the Dark Lord has not accounted for: years of trained deference to Hermione Granger's methodical certainty. In Umbridge's office, the argument is not abstract. Hermione's skepticism is surgical. She dissects the improbability of Sirius being in the Ministry, the timing, the pattern of Voldemort's manipulations, and every word feels like a hand on Harry's chest, forcing him to breathe. He is shaking with the image of his godfather in chains. Yet the habit is ingrained now. When the world fractures, he looks to Hermione. When she says, quietly, that this might be a trap, he believes her. Almost. The fracture line is visible. He chooses the Ministry anyway, But this time he does it knowing he is walking against her logic, not oblivious to it, and that awareness will haunt him more than the prophecy itself. The recruitment of allies reflects that internal war. Canon remembers a reckless boy dragging his friends into danger. They are wrong. Here, Harry's first instinct is exclusion, not inclusion. He tries to strip the mission down to himself and, at most, Ron. Hermione is the non-negotiable variable in his mind, the masterpiece he refuses to place on a battlefield. His protests are uncharacteristically sharp. He throws her own arguments back at her, cites risk profiles and the lack of adult backup, sounding, for a moment, like a junior strategist rather than a desperate teenager. Hermione does not yield. She invokes their shared history, the Troll, the Time Turner Knights, the soul resonance of two children who have already cheated death together. She will stand with him, or he will not go at all. The ultimatum terrifies him and deepens him in the same breath. Inside the Department of Mysteries, that terror translates into altered tactics. The Slytherin timeline taught us what Harry looks like as a weapon being polished in the dark. Here we glimpse the inverse, a weapon misfiring because it loves. In the spinning room, in the Hall of Prophecy, his body is a moving shield around Hermione. He positions himself between her and unknown doors, snaps stunning spells at angles that leave his flank open. But her line of retreat clear, trusts her to anchor Ron while he intercepts threats on their perimeter. When the Death Eaters close in, he takes a reductor curse meant for her shoulder, the impact spinning him into a shelf. Glass and prophecy orbs rain down like a shattered future. Even his mistakes are gravitational, pulled again and again toward her survival. Sirius's death is therefore not just a godfather falling through a veil. It is the catastrophic failure of that private campaign. Back in the makeshift fortress of the hospital wing, Harry does not break in front of Ron. He breaks in front of Hermione. The numbness that rejected Dumbledore's platitudes yields, slowly, to her presence at his bedside, to her hand closing around his, with quiet, relentless authority. The conversation about the prophecy is refracted through her. He hears, "Neither can live while the other survives," and instantly maps a second clause the orb never voiced. Anyone he loves is leverage in the coming war. The chilling realization settles with alpine clarity. Harry understands he is not merely a target, he is a pressure point Voldemort will press until something vital snaps. From this night on, he begins to think like a strategist, rehearsing occlumency with a new, vicious focus, building lies around Hermione's importance, planning how to hide his greatest vulnerability from a Legilemens who lives in his head. The question is no longer whether he can survive the Dark Lord. It is whether his heart can remain invisible long enough for either of them to win. Half-blood prince, potions, Horcruxes, and a love he can't admit. By 6th year, the war for Harry's heart is no longer metaphorical. It is a live front, threaded through potions, fumes, and Horcrux visions, and no one in the castle has the faintest idea. They are wrong. The gossip columns will later insist this was the Ginny year. In this timeline, the axis is Hermione. Slughorn's first lesson becomes the opening skirmish. The Half-Blood Prince's annotations turn Harry into a potion savant overnight, a weapon being polished in the dark by an anonymous hand. Hermione's frustration in canon is academic, a wounded pride in being outperformed. Here, it carries the cold edge of betrayal. She watches him slice, stir, and succeed with methodical certainty, using shortcuts she cannot verify. And the boy who once clung to her rules now shrugs at them. When she challenges him, voice tight, eyes searching for the ally who used to take her side against recklessness, Harry's answer is sharper than he intends, defensive in a way that startles even him. The argument is not about a textbook. It is about whether the Hermione-shaped compass in his chest is losing its north. Ginny Weasley enters this volatile field not as destined match, but as dangerous possibility. Harry still feels the pull. Her Quidditch fire, her refusal to be cowed by danger, the way she moves through the world like a smaller red-haired comet. Yet every flicker of attraction is forced to pass through the older, deeper soul resonance he has with Hermione. He compares without meaning to Hermione's relentless analysis against Ginny's instinct, Hermione's years in the trenches of his nightmares against Ginny's more recent courage in the DA, and any imagined future with Ginny arrives preloaded with guilt. A kiss with Ginny would not be a beginning. In this timeline, it would feel like treason against a war that has been quietly raging inside him since third year. Ron and Lavender, meanwhile, become a cautionary spectacle. Harry watches Ron's loud, performative romance implode, half cringing, half terrified. Ron's long-standing, half-buried crush on Hermione is no longer theoretical. It is written in every sulk when she praises Harry, in every brittle joke when she disappears to the library with him. Lavender is a distraction, but also a mirror held up to Harry's worst fear, that if he reaches for Hermione openly, the trio shatters and never reforms. So he buries deeper, plays the role of neutral friend with almost tactically lethal precision. Even as Hermione's mixed reactions to Ron, affection, exasperation, something like testing, cut along fault lines he refuses to name. Into this emotional siege, Dumbledore drags him through memories of Tom Riddle and the anatomy of a fractured soul. Each pensive visit is framed for Harry by a single calculation. Who will stand beside me when this becomes open war? Hermione is non-negotiable. He begins training her without confession, turning study sessions into covert preparation, advanced defensive spells, speculative Horcrux theory, contingency plans, spoken as hypotheticals. To her, it is simply what they do. To him, it is the quiet construction of a two-person fortress under the headmaster's nose. The tower breaks the year cleanly in half. When the green light fades and Dumbledore falls, Harry's first coherent thought of the future is not of prophecy, nor of Ginny waiting in the common room, but of Hermione, of her capacity to endure, to question, to follow him into the dark even if he never gives her the full map. On the ground below, as he tells Ron and Ginny he will not return to Hogwarts, there is an unspoken clause already written. Hermione will come with me. that assumption is both his greatest comfort and his most terrifying act of authority over someone he loves. The world will remember a boy who broke up with his girlfriend to hunt Horcruxes. They are wrong again. What actually leaves the castle that night is a dyad already forming, a masterpiece to be molded by exile, secrecy, and a war that will not politely wait for them to sort out what they are to each other. The pact in the burrow, planning a war, hiding a heart. The burrow is supposed to be a refuge, a ramshackle fortress of mismatched chairs and exploding stew pots where war feels very far away. In this timeline, it becomes a command bunker disguised as domestic chaos, a place where laughter and clattering pans are simply the cover noise for two teenagers quietly reorganizing the coming campaign. They do it in fragments. A half hour in Ginny's empty room while Molly argues with the ghoul about wedding linens. A stolen dawn in the orchard while gnomes watch from the roots. Hermione spreads parchment like battle maps, Horcrux candidates, Gringotts layouts, obscure references to Founders' relics, while Harry moves pieces in his head with a methodical certainty that would have startled even Bellatrix's alpine tutors. Ron is always included in theory, but not always in practice. This is the new fracture line inside the trio, a two-person conspiracy politely pretending it isn't. The pattern interrupt comes one humid afternoon, when planning slips and the war walks into the room wearing Hermione's face. She tells him about her parents, not abstractly, not as a hypothetical sacrifice, but as a finished spell. She has already done it. The words, "I made them think they're different people," land with the weight of an unforgivable. Canon remembers his horror. They are wrong. In this Slytherin timeline, horror is only the first layer. What follows is a reverent, almost frightened recognition of scale. Because Harry understands now, with the cold clarity of a weapon being polished in the dark, that she has not merely chosen a side in a war, she has chosen him as the axis around which her life can be broken and rebuilt. His vow to be worthy of that cost is not spoken, but it begins here, in the silence after he whispers, "You did that. For me, night sharpens everything. The Weasley orchard, usually a backdrop for Quidditch and sibling bickering, becomes their unofficial war room. They walk between rows of trees while the burrow glows behind them like a distant, safer world. Conversations about disillusionment, charms, and Muggle cash supplies drift, inevitably, toward the edge of something else, toward the way Hermione's hand lingers when she passes him a quill, toward the way Harry's gaze keeps returning to her mouth when she argues about route sequencing. Near confessions accumulate. A breath held too long when they almost collide in a cramped bedroom. A half-formed, "There's something I should tell you," drowned out by a distant explosion from Fred and George. Each of them senses that naming this soul resonance would change the mission's physics, turn every risk into emotional roulette, and each of them is, in their own way, a strategist. They pull back, they live in the unsaid. Ron, meanwhile, lives in the almost seen. He notices the intensity between them, the way maps and books seem to orbit their shared focus, but he files it under Hermione being mental about research and Harry stressing about you-know-who. His old fear of being the permanent third wheel flickers when he walks in on them hunched over a parchment he hasn't been briefed on. Yet Hermione's deliberate efforts to loop him back, thrusting a book into his hands, demanding his opinion on decoy routes, keep the insecurity from crystallizing into accusation. For now, war explains everything. It is a convenient lie they all agree to believe. On the night before the wedding, the burrow hums with last-minute panic. Flowers misbehaving, dress robes going missing, Molly's voice rising like a battle horn. Harry and Hermione stand at an upstairs window, watching lanterns sway in the warm dark. No grand speeches, no confessions, just a shared, steady look when she quietly asks, "We leave as soon as we can, yes?" And he answers, "Together." That is the pact. Love is not declared. It is operationalized as an unbreakable commitment, a decision that, whatever waits beyond the borough's wards, will face them as a unit. The world will call what follows a Horcrux hunt. They are wrong again. What actually leaves with them is a two-person war council whose first target is not Voldemort, but Dumbledore's unfinished plans, camping with a fault line, the locket, the fight, and Ron's exit. The tents are not shelters. They are pressure cookers. In this timeline, the Horcrux hunt does not simply isolate 3 teenagers in the wilderness. It forces a decade of unspoken loyalties into a single, airless canvas room. Hunger erodes patience. Sleeplessness frays occlumency that was never fully learned. And the silence between missions becomes its own battlefield. In that cramped fortress of worn canvas and failing wards, Harry and Hermione's long-standing intimacy can no longer hide in the background noise of a crowded common room. It is visible in the way Hermione's hand finds his forearm when the wireless crackles with news of casualties, in the shorthand glances that replace full sentences. In the reflexive way Harry angles his body between her and any perceived threat, even when that threat is only a draft in the tent flap. Ron watches this with the slow, corrosive awareness of a man realizing he has been a secondary orbit all along. The trio is no longer symmetrical. The triangle has collapsed inward, and the point is Harry. The locket understands this before Harry does. Horcruxes are not merely dark objects. They are amplifiers of fracture points, exquisitely tuned to soul resonance. Around Ron's neck, the metal cools, then burns, then whispers. It does not bother with abstract fears of failure or poverty. It shows him images. Harry and Hermione bent over a map, shoulders touching, their voices low and coordinated. Hermione deferring to Harry's methodical certainty, even when Ron has spoken first. Harry watching her as she sleeps after a night of nightmares. His gaze too intent, too tender, to be called merely friendly. In the Slytherin timeline of this relationship, the Horcrux becomes tactically lethal. It weaponizes every half-averted glance, every moment when Hermione obeys Harry's word without argument, every time Harry takes Hermione's side in a dispute about where to apparate next or which lead to pursue. Ron is not imagining patterns. He is seeing, for the first time, the masterpiece to be molded that has been growing between them since first year. When he finally explodes, It is not a vague accusation of abandonment. It is an indictment. He names the way Harry looks at Hermione when he thinks no one is watching. The way Hermione recalibrates her plans the instant Harry disagrees. The way Harry never seems to doubt her, but always seems to doubt Ron. The argument tears through the tent like a curse. Pots rattle, wards shimmer, and Harry, for the first time, is forced to hear his own heart described back to him in Ron's furious, shaking voice. They are wrong, he wants to say. Wrong about timing, wrong about intention. But he cannot say they are wrong about the feeling. Ron leaves. The pop of disapparition is obscenely small for what it takes with it. Hermione does not only collapse into sobs. She rounds on Harry first, eyes bright with rage and grief, accusing him of strategic blindness. He should have seen this coming, should have taken the locket more often, should have realized that their closeness was not invisible just because they never named it. Then, as the adrenaline drains, she clings to him with a desperation that feels less like comfort and more like triage. He becomes the last constant in a world that keeps subtracting Weasleys, mentors, and certainties. Guilt settles over them like a second set of wards. They move through the next days as a two-person unit, more efficient, more silent, more frighteningly aligned, a weapon being polished in the dark. So when the wireless stumbles into a slow, mournful song and Harry offers his hand, the dance inside the tent is not ambiguous. Their bodies find the old, easy proximity. Her cheek brushes his shoulder. His fingers tighten at her waist. For a suspended heartbeat, the world narrows to the space between their mouths. It is an almost confession, an almost kiss, an almost everything. And both of them understand, with surgical clarity, that if they cross that final inch, there may be no trio, no Ron, to return to. Harry pulls back first. The war, however, is not finished pulling. The silver doe, redemption, resentment, and choosing each other again. The war pulls them into the forest. The silver doe glides through the trees like a memory given form. And in this timeline, Harry follows it with a different kind of hunger. Not just for victory, but for a future where Hermione Granger is not a target walking under an executioner's sky. The pool, when he reaches it, is not merely a trial, it is an altar. He strips, steps into the water, and the cold is a weapon. It seizes his lungs, drags at his ribs, turns every instinct toward retreat. But the flash of the sword of Gryffindor beneath the ice is more than a relic. It is a promise that the Horcruxes can end, that the war stalking Hermione's life can be strangled at the root. When the locket tightens, when the chain claws at his throat, and the world narrows to panic and dark water, his last coherent thought is not of prophecy or destiny, but of her face if he fails. He almost dies for that imagined expression, a near sacrifice, not for the abstract world, but for one singular, stubborn witch who has become his private axis of meaning. Ron's rescue fractures the surface. The canon image holds, Ron diving, hauling Harry out, gasping on the bank. But the emotional geometry has shifted. Ron has not just saved his best friend, He has unknowingly preserved the one person who has been quietly in love with the girl Ron believes is his. Then comes the locket. The Horcrux understands power through corrosion. When it opens, its visions do not invent a lie. They weaponize a truth. The spectral Harry and Hermione it conjures are not grotesque parodies, but near-perfect echoes of moments already lived. The way her hand lingers on Harry's arm when she thinks no one sees. The sole resonance of two strategists who have spent years moving as one mind in battle. The embrace is too familiar. The kiss it shows is simply the inch they did not cross in the tent, rendered in silver fire. Ron's horror, therefore, is rational. They are wrong, those who say the locket made it all up. In this Slytherin timeline of emotions, the Horcrux is tactically lethal precisely because it amplifies what already exists. When the sword falls, when the locket shatters and the scream dies into frozen air, the real confrontation begins. Hermione's fury is volcanic, a weeks-long abandonment igniting into words that feel like hexes. Harry's anger is quieter, almost clinical. He dissects Ron's excuses with methodical certainty, not to humiliate him, but because he has watched Hermione disintegrate in the silence Ron left behind, and refuses to let that be minimized. Forgiveness arrives, but limping. Ron is welcomed back into the tent, into the mission, into the fragile fortress of three, but he can feel with animal clarity that some inner chamber is barred to him now. Harry and Hermione share a layer of trauma, of almost romance and near-death bargains that he cannot enter. He laughs when they do, plans when they plan, but there is a second conversation in every glance that is not his. That night, when the camp finally falls quiet, Harry watches Hermione sleep by the dwindling fire. The words are there, fully formed, a confession, a redefinition, a declaration that would shift the axis of their war. He can imagine the resonance of her answer, the world they might build from that honesty. He swallows it, not because he doubts her, but because he understands that Ron's fragile return, the Horcrux hunt, and the brittle balance of authority holding their trio together might shatter under that truth. For now, his love remains what it has always been in this timeline, a weapon being polished in the dark, waiting for the moment it must finally be drawn. From Malfoy Manor to Shell Cottage, torture, rescue, and unbreakable bonds. The moment Bellatrix's voice purrs, Crucio, the Slytherin timeline tears away from anything resembling canon restraint. In the fetid drawing room of Malfoy Manor, Hermione's scream does not merely echo. It detonates inside Harry's skull, a shattering frequency that fuses love, terror, and helplessness into a single, blinding impulse. He moves. It is not strategic, not tactically lethal, not the methodical certainty that has defined him up to now. Harry lunges for the stairs, for Bellatrix, for the wand that is tearing Hermione open, and it takes Ron's full weight and the goblin's panicked grip to drag him back behind the bars of their makeshift cell. The world will later tell itself that Harry Potter is brave in the face of torture. They are wrong. In this timeline, he is feral, half mad, slamming against wards until his throat is raw, because the soul resonance he has spent years denying is being carved into bone by every fresh cry from above. The manor becomes a distorted alpine fortress turned inside out. No snow, only marble and dust. No clean silence, only the staccato of Hermione's agony. When she chokes out their fake story about the sword, he hears the lie as clearly as he once heard her voice steady him in the Department of Mysteries. And he understands, with the strategist's horror, that love has just overridden her usual calculus of survival. She is gambling her life on buying him seconds. The pattern interrupt comes as a small, ridiculous pop. Dobby appears, the house elf's presence an absurdity in a room saturated with pure, ritualized cruelty, and suddenly the board flips. Shouts, spells, collapsing chandeliers. Chaos blooms. Yet Harry's perception narrows to a single axis: Hermione's location. When they burst into the drawing room, he does not see Lucius, does not see Draco, barely registers Bellatrix's wild eyes. He sees Hermione sprawled on the floor, shaking, her skin carved with a word that has always defined her, and that he has always secretly worshipped. Mudblood. He reaches her before anyone else, throwing himself across her body, as if his ribs are a shield that can intercept curses. In this timeline, "Are you all right?" is obsolete. His hands are already running along her arms, checking for broken bones, his ear pressed to her mouth to feel the faint, ragged brush of breath. When a spell flies, he twists, taking the impact on his shoulder rather than risk it glancing into her. Dobby's rescue becomes, for Harry, a single sustained act: carry Hermione out. He physically lifts her, refuses to relinquish her weight even when Bill shouts for him to move, and will not allow anyone to work on her until he has seen her eyes open at least once. Shell Cottage is canonically a refuge. In this timeline, it is a recovery ward and a confessional. Days blur into a ritual. Hermione sleeping under potions and salves. Harry seated at her bedside, fingers locked around her hand, as if anchoring her to the world by sheer refusal. He does not sleep properly. He dozes in the chair, snapping awake at every shift of her breathing. When she finally surfaces, there is no banter, no academic analysis of what went wrong. Their first conversation is stripped down to elemental truths. "I thought I'd lost you. You didn't. I was so afraid. Me too." And the silence between those phrases is heavier than any declaration. Ron is there. He is horrified, devoted, and genuinely shattered by what was done to her. But he cannot miss the microphysics of the room. The way Hermione's fingers tighten when Harry steps away even briefly. The way Harry's jaw locks and his eyes glaze whenever anyone mentions Malfoy Manor, as if replaying a private execution he failed to carry out. Ron is not stupid. He understands that there is a wavelength between them, built from shared crises, time-turner nights, and a decade of unspoken almosts that he can stand beside, but never fully inhabit. From this point, Harry's love stops being a secret ache and becomes policy. He recalibrates the war with a single, absolute premise: Hermione Granger will not die for him. If a final sacrifice is demanded, as every prophecy, every mentor, every pattern of this dark world suggests, then he will be the body that walks into the forest, not hers, never hers. The decision crystallizes here, in salt air and convalescent quiet. And it will be the invisible hand on his back when he steps into the forbidden forest, not as a boy accepting fate, but as a weapon being polished in the dark, finally choosing where it will break. The Battle of Hogwarts, strategy, sacrifice, and who he looks at last. When the fortress finally calls its lost children home, Harry steps through the shattered wards of Hogwarts with one fixed point in a collapsing world. Hermione Granger must live. The legends will later claim that he strode in as a general, eyes sweeping the battlefield with methodical certainty, already half a martyr in motion. They are wrong. In this timeline, every scan of the corridors, every snapped order, is quietly triangulated around the line of her body in space. On the surface, his priorities look noble and diffuse. Get the younger students out. Reinforce McGonagall. Seal the secret passages. But the internal calculus is brutally simple. Where can Hermione do the most good without dying in the first 10 minutes? When he sends Ron to warn Percy, he keeps Hermione at his side. When he agrees to split at the staircases, he assigns her to routes he has already mapped as structurally safer, steering her away from exposed courtyards and the tactically lethal bottlenecks he knows the Carrows favor. Every choice is a chess move with a single, unspoken king. Inside the castle-wide Horcrux hunt, that private axis hardens into open command. The room of requirement does not just become a refuge, it becomes their war room, a dark, alpine echo of all the nights they spent planning alone in tents and libraries. Harry and Hermione move as a single unit, finishing each other's deductions about diadems and concealment charms with an ease that feels less like friendship and more like soul resonance, finally weaponized. Others, Neville, Luna, the DA, fall into formation around them almost automatically. Ron is still crucial, still brave, but the strategic center of gravity has shifted. He is the third voice now, not the second. Then the ledger of the dead begins to fill. Fred's body in the rubble, Tonks and Remus laid out in cruel, quiet symmetry. These are not abstractions to Harry, they are ruptures. Yet the narrative of a boy shattered beyond function never quite lands here. In this Slytherin timeline of the heart, he and Hermione become each other's splints. She drags him away from Remus's still hand. He catches her when she staggers at the sight of Tonks, reminding her, hoarsely, viciously, that if they stop, those deaths purchase nothing. Their grief braids into a private language that isolates them even as it makes them tactically lethal. A two-person command chain moving through a world on fire. The walk into the forest is where that language breaks. Canon remembers a boy saying quick goodbyes and slipping away. In this timeline, Harry's departure is a deliberate severing. He pulls Hermione aside, away from Ron, away from the others, into a pocket of corridor where the battle noise dims to a distant roar. He does not say, "I love you." He does not need to. The hug is too long for friendship, his hand memorizing the line of her spine, his fingers catch briefly in her hair, brushing her temple as if trying to fix her face in permanent memory. When he steps back, the silence between them is louder than any speech. As he crosses into the forest, what steadies him is not abstract courage, Not Hogwarts' symbol, but the image of Hermione as he last saw her. Blood on her cheek, eyes incandescent with fury, still arguing that there must be another way. He walks towards Voldemort, believing with a weapon's cold clarity that his death is the last shield he can raise over her life. Yet even here, as the killing curse blooms green, one question coils in the dark. What happens to a masterpiece to be molded when the hand that chose to break wakes up again? After the resurrection, a different endgame, a different choice. He wakes into silence, not the clean white silence of King's Cross limbo, but the raw, ringing stillness of the Great Hall as Voldemort's body hits stone and the war's last spell dissipates into dust. The world says the boy who lived met his destiny in that moment, that his first thought was victory, prophecy, legend. They are wrong. In this timeline, Harry's first coherent impulse is brutally, almost embarrassingly simple. Find Hermione. The camera of history often lingers on the Elder Wand, on the fallen Dark Lord, on the crowd beginning to surge. Here, the frame shifts. Harry staggers, ribs aching, magic crackling off his skin like a dissipating storm, and his gaze rakes the hall with a methodical certainty that has nothing to do with tactics and everything to do with soul resonance. When he sees her, blood on her temple, shoulders squared, wand still raised as if the war might restart at any second, he doesn't raise his arms in triumph. He crosses the distance and folds into her. The hug is not cinematic. It is clumsy, desperate, almost silent. Fingers dig into fabric, as if checking for solidity, for bone and breath, as if each is half convinced the other is a hallucination, conjured by trauma. Around them, the world roars. Inside that contact, there is only a shaking exhale and the shared, stunned knowledge that both of them are still here. The days that follow do not grant them the luxury of processing what that means. Hogwarts becomes a half-ruin, half-fortress of grief management and logistics. Harry and Hermione move through it as a single, continuous presence, drafting lists of the dead for funerals, giving statements to a ministry desperate to reassert authority, sitting beside shattered first years whose parents will never arrive. In this timeline, their partnership is not an abstract legend. It is a visible daily reality. Ron watches from the periphery, wounded in body and in something quieter, as every practical task, every late-night strategy conversation defaults to Harry and Hermione with a kind of tactically lethal efficiency. It is here that the romantic crossroads sharpens, without Cannon's late-blooming, misdirected crushes to blur the lines. Harry knows exactly what he has been doing for years, building his life, his risk calculus, his willingness to die, around one girl's survival. He can continue to bury that truth, accept a future that feels misaligned by a few crucial degrees, or he can speak and risk detonating the last intact structure of his world, the trio itself. Multiple futures radiate from this fault line. In one, they do nothing for months, letting funerals and trials sand down the immediate intensity until a quiet evening in the rebuilt library turns into a halting confession and a slow, careful redefinition of we. Ron, hurt, but fundamentally loyal, peels away toward a different path. Perhaps Aurora work that does not orbit Harry? Perhaps George's shop, where humor becomes his chosen weapon against the dark. In another, Harry and Hermione, never quite articulated, yet move through political reconstruction as an unmistakable unit. A masterpiece of joint authority, co-authors of legislation on Muggle-born rights, public advocates against Azkaban's Dementors, the moral axis around which the post-war ministry reluctantly rotates. Their united front as war heroes in any of these branches shifts the balance of power. A Harry who listens to Hermione not just as his clever friend, but as the person he loves, is far less likely to cede blind trust to Dumbledore's successors. Reforms become methodical certainty rather than fragile aspiration. The Slytherin timeline showed us a weapon being polished in the dark. Here, the weapon survives and must decide what to do when there is no enemy left to justify its edge. Which leaves one unresolved question hanging over the rebuilt castle, like an uncast spell. When a life has been organized around keeping one person alive, what does it mean to live in peace beside them? And can a love forged entirely in crisis ever relax into anything resembling the ordinary, or does it inevitably reshape the world again just by trying? Butterfly effects, canon events, bent by one quiet crush. Peace, in this timeline, is not an ending. It is a stress test of every choice that led here, a final audit of how one quiet crush bent the architecture of destiny. Begin at the troll. In canon, the rescue forges a trio out of adrenaline and guilt. The bond is powerful but still diffuse. Here, Harry's terror is not abstract heroism, but targeted fear. Hermione, alone in danger. He does not hesitate. He does not calculate odds. His first major rule break is already an act of focused protection. From that night, keep Hermione alive becomes the hidden algorithm beneath his decisions, a weapon being polished in the dark inside his own chest. Move forward to the Time Turner year. Canon gives them shared hardship and fraying patience. In this timeline, those extra hours in the cold corridors and hospital wing silences harden into soul resonance. Harry listens when she says, "Wait," not because the rules matter, but because her safety does. The risk profile shifts. He is more willing to shatter curfew, challenge Snape, or stalk a murderer across the grounds if it keeps her from harm. Yet he pulls back from the most reckless impulses when she flinches. Recklessness is not erased. It is gated through Hermione's heartbeat. The Yule Ball reveals the cost. In canon, his jealousy is clumsy, misdirected toward Cho and Quidditch glory. Here, every glance she gives Crumb is a reminder that his entire internal war is invisible to her. Ron's role, already destabilized by Harry's emotional gravity, begins to fracture. The easy assumption that he is co-hero, not supporting cast, erodes each time Harry unconsciously orbits Hermione's perspective first. Ron survives the basilisk, the shrieking shack, the Quidditch stands. But his self-esteem does not emerge unscarred. By the Department of Mysteries, the divergence is structural. Canon Harry charges in, fueled by prophecy and Sirius. In this version, Hermione is the non-negotiable asset. He trains harder, listens more, and builds contingency plans, because losing her is intolerable. Their survival odds rise. She is shielded first, healed first. Others benefit by proximity. Neville pulled behind stronger wards. Ginny warned earlier. Even Luna folded into a tighter formation. But some futures die quietly. Cho's potential romance, Ron's unexamined claim to the center, the possibility of Harry drifting aimlessly between crushes, all are casualties of a methodical certainty that Hermione is the axis. Yet power invites counter-moves. Voldemort is not stupid, and neither are his followers. Once they deduce that harm to one Muggle-born girl can unmake the boy who lived's composure, Hermione becomes a strategic target years earlier. Cursed objects angled toward her. Death Eaters instructed to prioritize capture over kill. Psychological warfare calibrated to that single point of leverage. Harry's response is correspondingly darker. He studies occlumency to hide her significance, builds a private fortress of contingencies, and begins to treat his own morality as negotiable currency, so long as she walks away breathing. They will call it fate. They are Rom. What we see, laid out from Troll to Time Turner, from Yule Ball to the Hall of Prophecy, is love functioning as a hidden variable, not a spell, not a prophecy, but a persistent bias in decision-making that, compounded over 7 years, drags the narrative into a different emotional and political configuration. The Slytherin timeline had a boy sculpted as a masterpiece to be molded by Bellatrix. This quieter branch has a boy self-forged around a single girl. Both produce tactically lethal protectors. The question is which world survives them, and what it costs to stand that close to the center of their design. Ron Weasley rewritten, from best mate to tragic almost hero. If Harry is a design built around Hermione, then Ron Weasley is the first structural compromise the world demands of that design. In canon, he is the easy laughter, the uncomplicated best mate. In this timeline, they are wrong to call it uncomplicated. The fracture is seeded almost immediately. On the Hogwarts Express, Ron's awe at sharing a compartment with the boy who lived is genuine, almost luminous. He thinks he has finally escaped the shadowed hierarchy of the burrow and found a friend who is just as lost as he is. But the moment Hermione Granger slides open that door, correcting Ron's spell work with brisk precision, the balance tilts. Harry's gaze lingers, not only in gratitude for her help, but with that half-formed soul resonance of the boy who has just discovered his axis. Ron feels it without language. From then on, every argument about rules, every debate about risk, ends with Harry quietly aligning to Hermione's methodical certainty. The troll in the bathroom still forges the trio, but the emotional metallurgy is different. When Harry charges after Hermione, there is a sharpened edge to his fear. When he offers her friendship afterwards, Ron watches a bond click into place with the inevitability of a locking charm. His jokes get louder, his detentions get riskier. Subconsciously, he is already fighting a war for relevance against a weapon being polished in the dark and the girl who sharpens him. By the Yule Ball, the pressure detonates. Canon paints Ron's jealousy as muddled, half-understood rage at Hermione's transformation. In this timeline, Victor Crumb is not just a Quidditch idol stealing his date. He is proof that Hermione is visible to the world, that Harry's eyes track her across the Great Hall with a quiet, devastated focus Ron has never earned from anyone. His infamous outburst is less petty tantrum and more the howl of someone who has finally realized he is the third point of a triangle whose base has already fused without him. The locket only weaponizes what has been there for years. In that frozen tent, Horcrux whispers do not have to invent insecurities. They simply amplify the obvious. Visions of Harry and Hermione, heads bowed together over plans of Harry stepping in front of her with tactically lethal reflex, of a future where their partnership is a fortress he can never enter, pour into Ron with merciless clarity. When he leaves, it is not only out of rage. It is self-exile from an emotional battlefield he believes he has already lost. And yet, he comes back. Destroying the locket becomes his private reclamation of worth. He pulls Harry from the icy pool, swings the sword, and faces a Horcrux that taunts him with images of Harry and Hermione entwined, not as abstract torment, but as a plausible future. He swings anyway. His heroism is not diminished by his jealousy. It is reframed as courage in full knowledge that he may never be the central figure in Hermione's heart. At Hogwarts, he still saves lives, still stands in the rubble and smoke of war, still fights under Harry's de facto authority. The world will remember him as a Weasley general, not a footnote. But the silence between battles is heavier now. The easy, adolescent banter with Harry never fully returns. Too much has been named, even if never spoken aloud. So where does he go when the dust settles and Harry and Hermione, whatever they officially are, move through the world as a unit? Plausible futures unfold like branching timelines. He might join the Auras, channeling his anger and loyalty into chasing down the remnants of Voldemort's followers, finally stepping into a role where his instincts are an asset instead of a punchline. He might drift into professional Quidditch, finding in the roar of stadiums a different kind of validation than the quiet, intellectual intimacy he watched from the outside for years. He might, perhaps most healthily, build something of his own. Whether a joke shop venture expanded with George, or a new post-war enterprise that turns his strategic flashes into real-world influence. Crucially, in this configuration, any lasting relationship he forms is less likely to be a consolation prize from within the trio's orbit, and more likely to be forged with someone who sees him first. Not as Harry's friend or Hermione's almost, a partner who admires the way he came back, the way he fought, the way he learned to stand beside brilliance without demanding it dim for him. Ron becomes a necessary casualty of this what if, not in blood, but in the loss of that naive belief that friendship can stay untouched by love's gravity. His arc shifts from comic relief to case study. What happens to a fundamentally good person when the people he loves most build a world that does not quite have a primary place for him? The answer will matter because the next section asks whether Harry and Hermione's apparent emotional victory is, in fact, a strategic defeat. Hermione Granger, chosen twice, how being loved changes her. If Ron is the case study, Hermione is the experiment's control. Except in this timeline, the control has already been tampered with. The wizarding world assumes Hermione Granger is simply the brightest witch of her age, a walking textbook who happens to stand near the boy who lived. They are wrong. From first year, the loneliness that drives her to cry in a bathroom is not met by indifferent corridors and a stray troll. It is met by a boy who already quietly orbits her. When Harry's awe is not just at her spells but at her presence, at the way she walks into a room and the air seems to acquire methodical certainty. Hermione's isolation softens at the edges. She is still the muggle born in a hostile fortress, still the girl who over-prepares for every exam as if war were being waged on parchment. But she has empirical proof that she is not merely useful. She is wanted. That changes her mathematics of danger. Canon Hermione throws herself between Harry and death out of principle and friendship. Here, she knows, consciously or not, that her absence would collapse the fragile architecture of his inner world. The troll, the devil's snare, the polyjuice in a stolen bathroom. Each risk is now weighed against the image of Harry shattered in the hospital wing. And yet, paradoxically, this awareness makes her more, not less, willing to stand beside him when a cause passes her internal audit, when she believes in house elf rights, in resisting Umbridge, in hunting Horcruxes. She does not merely assist. She co-authors the strategy. A weapon being polished in the dark, but one that insists on moral constraints. Romantically, the shift is slower, more dangerous. Hermione, who in canon flinches at her reflection and assumes she is invisible next to Vela glamours and Quidditch stars, encounters a Harry whose gaze lingers with a different resonance. He listens too closely, agrees too quickly, laughs a fraction too warmly. At first, she misfiles it as gratitude, then loyalty, and only later, around the Yule Ball that does not quite break her in the same way, does she register the soul resonance beneath it. Confidence blooms. She straightens her shoulders, debates professors with greater authority. But so does guilt, because Ron's half-formed feelings are not erased by this triangle. They are intensified by it. By the time Dumbledore's army forms, Hermione is no longer merely the organizer with the parchment and the plan. She is half of an unspoken power couple. In the room of requirement, wands raised towards makeshift dummies, the hierarchy of blood and gender fractures under observation. If Harry treats a muggle-born girl as his equal in power and judgment, then the old Slytherin timeline logic that leadership flows from family trees and male lineage begins to look obsolete. Younger students watch Harry defer to her on tactics, on ethics, on when to push and when to wait, and Hermione's authority ceases to be an anomaly. It becomes precedent. The Horcrux hunt crystallizes this evolution. In the tent, cold seeping through thin canvas, their arguments are not about whether Hermione matters, but about how much of herself she is allowed to spend. She calibrates every risk with two variables, the war's outcome and Harry's survival. When she obliviates her parents, when she walks back into Malfoy Manor, knowing exactly what purebloods do to girls like her, she does it with a tactically lethal clarity. If Harry falls, all of this collapses. If she falls, he may yet stand. And so the end game forces an answer. When the dust settles and the Dark Lord is a body on the floor, rather than a shadow on the world. Hermione must decide what to do with the knowledge that the boy who rebuilt himself around her has, perhaps, built the future around her as well. To reciprocate is to bind the moral architecture of the post-war order to an intimate bond. To redirect is to risk leaving Harry unmoored. To refuse is to assert that even this timeline's grandest soul resonance must bow to independent destiny. Whatever she chooses will not simply define her romantic life. It will determine whether the new world they have forged is anchored in shared love, disciplined restraint, or deliberate distance. And the next section will ask whether any of those anchors can truly hold. Dumbledore and the War Machine, a different kind of pawn. Dumbledore's problem is no longer a lonely boy aching for belonging. It is a bonded pair who have already chosen each other as their first authority. The world will still call Harry a symbol, a savior, a blank banner to project their hopes onto. They are wrong. In this timeline, every major decision that matters to Harry passes first through Hermione's gaze. The pattern begins trivially. Homework schedules, rule bending, the ethics of polyjuice, and then ossifies into habit. No prophecy meeting, no secret lesson, no suicidal mission without a quiet consultation in the library's shadowed aisles. Dumbledore recognizes the resonance early. Each attempt to isolate Harry, to stage manage necessary ignorance, now risks collateral damage. Hermione's suspicion. A weapon being polished in the dark can be guided. A bonded dyad must be negotiated with. Faced with that, Dumbledore's calculus shifts. Either he brings Hermione into the inner circle years earlier, explaining Horcruxes to a 14-year-old who takes meticulous notes, or he watches Harry's trust erode with methodical certainty. Occlumency without Hermione present? Harry refuses. Private audiences that exclude her after the Time Turner year. She will dissect them line by line until the gaps show. The old man is forced into a compromise he dislikes. Partial transparency. He feeds them curated truths, hoping their shared intellect will carry the war while their shared love keeps them obedient to the larger plan. It partially works, but it also forges a new center of gravity inside the Order. By 5th year, the so-called kids' table at Grimmauld Place is no longer a cluster of restless teenagers. It is a planning cell in miniature. Harry brings the moral urgency and battlefield instinct. Hermione supplies structure, precedent, and an almost bureaucratic ferocity. Ron, Ginny, the twins, even Neville begin deferring to their joint decisions. In the Slytherin timeline, this would be formalized as a war council. Here it grows organically, a masterpiece of influence hidden in plain sight around a scarred kitchen table. Hermione's Muggle-born perspective threads through every conversation. She asks why the Order has no Muggle liaison, why protections stop at parish boundaries instead of ring-fencing entire cities, why post-war reform is treated as a distant luxury rather than a live front. Harry, who once only wanted to survive, starts asking the same questions, now backed by the authority of his name. Together they become tactically lethal in a different register, not just killing Death Eaters, but drafting the bones of a future ministry that cannot so easily become a fortress for blood ideology again. The Ministry notices. Fudge's photo ops with Harry now include a girl who will not smile on command, who corrects statistics mid-interview and quietly refuses to let Harry sign documents he has not read. Scrimgeour's attempt to recruit the boy who lived as a mascot is strangled by Hermione's relentless cross-examination. What are your casualty projections? Minister, and why are Muggle-born families absent from your evacuation plans? Even Kingsley, more honest and more tired, understands that negotiation now means dealing with a dyad whose sole resonance is a structural fact, not a teenage phase. Pattern interrupt. Severus Snape, who has spent years reading adolescent minds like open books, finds this one unexpectedly hard to pass. In Harry's surface thoughts, he glimpses flashes. Hermione's hand on his wrist before he draws his wand, her voice anchoring him after nightmares. The quiet decision to die, if it means she lives. At first, Snape recoils, seeing James's infatuations replayed with a mudblood at the center. Then, slowly, contempt twists into a grudging respect. This boy would walk to his death not for glory, but for a Muggle-born witch who argues with him about house elves. By the war's end, that is the problem the institutions cannot solve. Dumbledore is gone, Voldemort is ash, but Harry refuses any role that requires him to set Hermione aside, physically, politically, or ideologically. He will not attend secret briefings that exclude her. He will not endorse laws she deems corrosive. He will not let his name be weaponized against the people she fought to protect. Loving Hermione becomes a constraint written into the system's source code. The world wanted a malleable savior. It receives a pair of interlocked lives that insist power answer to the heart, and the next movement of this timeline must ask what that demand does to everyone still clinging to the old order. Could they last? Harmony, canon, and the psychology of war love? The danger of building an ethic around a single relationship is simple. Peace arrives, and suddenly the war-born logic that once felt like methodical certainty begins to fray. History, both Muggle and magical, is littered with war couples, pairs who meet under bombardment, in resistance cells, in hospital corridors, smelling of antiseptic and ash. In the heat of shared peril, attraction feels like fate. Every escape amplifies the illusion of soul resonance. Every survival reads as proof that the universe has ordained this union. They are wrong. What the universe has ordained is pressure. And pressure distorts. In this timeline, Harry and Hermione are not merely comrades. They are adolescents whose entire emotional vocabulary is written inside a fortress of crisis. Trolls, basilisk corpses, time-turner midnights, the green flash of the Department of Mysteries. Each escalation wires the other into their nervous systems as both shield and mirror. The question is not whether they can love in war. The question is whether that love can breathe in the silence that follows. On paper, their compatibility looks almost engineered. Intellectually, they move in tandem. Hermione's need to understand and Harry's instinct to decide create a closed loop of analysis and action. Tactically lethal when aligned. Ethically, both default to protection of the vulnerable, even when authority demands otherwise. Yet, emotionally, the symmetry is less clean. Harry's intensity, his tendency to shoulder blame until it cuts bone, meets Hermione's perfectionism, her conviction that if she had only read more, planned better, controlled harder, catastrophe might have been averted. The risk is obvious. Each begins to experience the other's happiness as a duty rather than a gift. Unresolved guilt turns that duty into a weapon being polished in the dark. Harry will carry the dead. Cedric, Sirius, any classmate whose name is carved into memorial stone because he stepped forward and they followed. Hermione will carry the parents whose memories she shattered and exiled, the classmates she could not drag out of the fire. A romance layered over those wounds could, at its best, become a shared rehabilitation program. Two survivors refusing to let the other drown. At its worst, every argument becomes a tribunal. Every perceived failure another reason to self-punish through self-sacrifice. Alternative trajectories proliferate. There is a plausible future where, after the war, they attempt to date with peacetime honesty, discover that their brilliance as strategists of reform does not translate into domestic equilibrium, and consciously reforge themselves as political partners rather than spouses. There is another, quieter path where they never cross the explicit line, just friends in public record, yet live lives so interwoven that the label is functionally irrelevant. Joint legislation, co-authored texts, holidays spent in shared alpine retreats that once belonged to enemies. The Slytherin timeline teaches a brutal axiom: plausibility is not destiny. An early crush makes harmony more likely, not inevitable. What is inevitable is that their bond becomes the axis around which emotional and political gravity turns. Whether as lovers, ex-lovers, or an unnamed constant, every faction must now calculate around the Harry-Hermione vector, and the next movement of this war will show who underestimates that orbit first. Why Rowling said no, authorial intent versus narrative potential. The axis of that orbit runs straight into a wall. J.K. Rowling herself. The Harmony timeline is not the one she chose, and she has said so with methodical certainty. In interviews, she is almost clinically clear. Harry and Hermione were never planned as a couple. Ron and Hermione were always meant to be the slow-burn bickering pair, rewarded for endurance. And yet, years after the war was published and the world had cooled, a crack appears in that authorial fortress. Rowling admits that Harry-Hermione is plausible, that she can see the soul resonance readers found, and that Ron-Hermione may have been shaped, in part, to satisfy her own adolescent wishes. The canon pair becomes, in her own words, less a prophecy and more a preference. A masterpiece to be moulded, not an inevitability etched in stone. This matters because Ron-Hermione is not just a ship, it is a thesis about power. In canon, their union exalts the ordinary and the flawed. Ron is insecure, jealous, painfully human. Hermione is brilliant but rigid, often wrong before she is right. Their eventual convergence says, love can grow out of imperfection and proximity, out of years of shared meals and shared homework, out of war-making two awkward teenagers into adults. The magic is that there is nothing magical about it. In this timeline, where Harry's first real love is also his first real friend, the thematic center of gravity shifts. Harry-Hermione is meritocracy and mutual respect, a partnership built on shared mission and intellectual parity. The chosen one no longer reaches down for comfort. He reaches sideways for an equal. The narrative stops rewarding the boy who stumbles into greatness and starts rewarding the pair who study, strategize, and bleed together. The story becomes less about the triumph of the ordinary and more about the terrifying efficiency of the exceptional. Rowling's refusal of harmony in canon also protects a fragile equilibrium. Keeping Harry and Hermione strictly platonic allows the trio to function as a three-point structure rather than a romantic axis with an attached satellite. Ron can be comic relief, conscience, and emotional barometer without being permanently framed as the rival. Make Harry and Hermione a couple early, and Ron's role risks collapsing into jealousy, resentment, or exile. The tone tilts from school year adventure into overt romantic epic, the war refracted through the lens of who holds Harry's hand. And yet, they are wrong, those who claim the text cannot bear harmony. Readers already saw subtext in the tent in Deathly Hallows, in the Time Turner Year, in the way Harry instinctively trusts Hermione over almost every authority. This what if simply walks down a corridor the canon quietly built and never fully lit. Authorial intent stands, interpretive resonance moves in the dark around it. The result is not a fix, but an expansion. Imagining an early in love, Harry does not overwrite the Slytherin timeline of canon. It stress tests the characters, revealing how robust they are when emotional vectors are re-aimed. What changes if the weapon being polished in the dark is not Harry alone, but Harry and Hermione as a fused strategic unit? And how will the next movements of this war answer that question? Lessons from an unwritten love story. What this changes for us? In that question lies the quiet horror of this experiment. We changed nothing structural, no prophecy clause, no Dark Lord's birth, only an 11-year-old's private vector of affection. Yet the resonance is disproportionate. In this timeline, a boy's unspoken love does not conjure new spells or erase Horcruxes. It simply tilts his attention, and that tilt is enough to refract an entire war. This is the first lesson the Slytherin timeline offers back to us. History, even fictional history, rarely pivots on grand speeches alone. It turns on who we are secretly trying to protect when the corridor fills with smoke. Harry's early fixation on Hermione operates like a hidden gravitational field, subtle, deiable, but constantly pulling his choices into a new orbit. Real lives work the same way. The crush we never admit, the friend we always text first, becomes a quiet, strategic priority. A weapon being polished in the dark without either party naming it. The second lesson is more uncomfortable. Canon fandom loves to separate friendship and romance into clean, opposing houses. They are wrong. Harry and Hermione's bond, even before it becomes explicitly romantic in this scenario, exposes how porous that boundary really is. The hand on a library table, the decision to believe her over a beloved mentor, the way he orients his patrol routes to intersect her path. These are tactical movements that grow out of friendship but are saturated with something else. The point is not that every deep friendship must become a love story. The point is that we should grant our non-romantic bonds the same narrative weight, even as we acknowledge how easily they could have tipped. There is also the question of agency and a prophecy. The books imply that fate is a rigid script, but even in canon, the script is full of blank spaces where emotional choices write the stage directions. In this altered alignment, Harry does not escape the prophecy. He fulfills it with methodical certainty, yet the manner of fulfillment transforms everything. He listens to Hermione's cautions not as background noise, but as near law. He structures his campaigns around her survival. He is willing to burn bridges with Dumbledore, with Ron, with the entire fortress of Hogwarts itself, rather than risk her. The prophecy names who must face Voldemort. It does not dictate who he will refuse to lose on the way. Here, a pattern interrupt. Imagine rereading any beloved series and asking not what happens next, but whose unspoken loyalty is holding this scene together. Once you start looking, you will see these hidden variables everywhere. The side character who always volunteers for the dangerous watch, the mentor who is fractionally kinder to one student, the rival whose insults never quite cross a certain line. Each is a potential divergence point, a masterpiece to be molded by a single altered feeling. Finally, the shadow. Every love story, canonic, fan-imagined, or merely hypothesized like this one, casts a penumbra of what-ifs. If Harry turns toward Hermione earlier, who stands alone at the Yule Ball, who dies in the Department of Mysteries, who grows harder because they were not chosen as his center of gravity. To sit with that is to practice a deeper media literacy, recognizing that every fulfilled pairing implies an unfurling of quieter tragedies elsewhere. The world of this war is not repaired by Harry's redirected heart. It is merely reconfigured, and as we follow this reconfiguration into the coming confrontations, the question will not be whether love exists, but what it is willing to sacrifice to feel justified. From page to screen to fanfic. How to build your own divergence. The temptation, when playing with romance in a familiar war, is to wave a hand and declare that they'd be closer, as if proximity were a spell and not a sequence of choices. They are wrong. What actually makes a divergence tactically lethal is precision, one altered feeling nailed to one exact moment, then followed with methodical certainty through every beat of the narrative. In this timeline, the fulcrum is simple and embarrassingly human. An 11-year-old boy who falls in love without having language for it. You begin by identifying that single emotional divergence, Harry's early crush on Hermione, and then you anchor it, not to a vague first year, but to a specific canon hinge. The troll in the bathroom, or the corridor on the Hogwarts Express, where the bossy girl fixes his glasses and, in doing so, becomes the first person to look at him with unembarrassed competence instead of pity. That is your fixed point. From there, you do not jump to they date. You trace consequences. If Harry is already half in love by Halloween, his charge at the troll is not just Gryffindor bravado, it is the first time his loyalty, impulsiveness, and courage crystallize around one person. He is still Harry, reckless, self-sacrificing, allergic to authority. But the resonance has changed. Every later choice becomes a weapon being polished in the dark, pointed toward Hermione's safety and opinion. Internal consistency is the non-negotiable fortress. Even in wild AUs, Harry must still feel like himself. So you ask, in chamber, does a boy quietly in love listen even more fiercely when she warns him about the diary? In the Time Turner year, does the endless looped time with Hermione intensify his dependence on her judgment until Dumbledore's orders feel secondary? You are not rewriting his traits. You are rotating the emotional lens through which those traits fire. Specificity is where the divergence stops being a daydream and becomes a design. Do not say, they'd argue less. Rewrite the Yule Ball. Imagine Hermione's fury when Harry, who has been watching her with wordless devotion for years, still asks her as an afterthought or not at all. The dialogue sharpens, the body language stiffens, the later tent dance in Deathly Hallows is no longer an awkward comfort between friends, but a moment soaked with years of unspoken tension and misread silences. The walk into the forest becomes an exercise in soul resonance. What does it mean for Harry to die with the image of her face, not Cho's or Ginny's, as his final anchor? Ethical stakes cannot be airbrushed. When you change who Harry loves, you change who is sidelined. Ron's jokes curdle into defensiveness. Ginny's eventual arc shrinks or fractures. Hermione's agency risks being swallowed by the gravitational pull of Harry's gaze unless you consciously push back. A good what if does not flinch from this collateral emotional damage. It maps who loses power, who gains it, and who learns to live in the shadow of a reconfigured golden trio. Finally, you invite the world in. What if Hermione fell first, calibrating her meticulous plans around a boy who is oblivious to everything but war? What if Ron, always more perceptive than anyone admits, realizes the triangle years before either of them does and begins quietly sabotaging or safeguarding it? Each prompt is not a license for chaos, but a demand for close reading. You return to the page, to the exact lines and silences of canon, and you ask, again and again, if this one feeling shifted here, how far would the cracks travel before the war itself looks different? Because the next divergence we trace will not be gentle, and the map you have just built is the only protection you will have when the canon begins to fight back. The final reckoning. Was this world better or just different? The temptation at this point is to declare victory. A Harry who loves Hermione early must mean a better world, a safer war, a cleaner ending. They are wrong. In this timeline, the gains are real, almost blinding in their appeal. From first year onward, Harry's recklessness is no longer freefall. It is tethered to the question, what happens to her if I fail? The troll in the bathroom becomes not a half-formed dare, but the first glimpse of a boy who will throw himself between danger and Hermione with methodical certainty, learning, painfully, that bravery without planning is simply another way to get her killed. By third year, the Time Turner Nights are a quiet crucible, side by side in the dark, saving Buckbeak, Saving Sirius, Harry begins to internalize Hermione's caution as part of his own operating system. A weapon being polished in the dark is still a weapon. It simply learns to check the angle of every strike. Hermione, in turn, is no longer merely the conscience of the trio. She is allowed, by Harry's unwavering attention, to become fully empowered. When he listens to her, not as an obligation, but as the axis of his world, her instincts stop being footnotes and start being strategy. The war effort that eventually forms around them is anchored in a partnership that models mutual respect, almost to the point of severity. Plans are co-written, risks are co-owned, and the Horcrux hunt becomes less improvisational pilgrimage and more mobile fortress. Two minds in constant soul resonance against a tactically lethal enemy. But the losses are just as clear, and they are not cosmetic. Ron Weasley, who in canon oscillates between comic relief and unexpected moral center, finds the ground under his feet permanently tilted. The easy, chaotic balance of those early years. The chess games, the shared detentions, the unspoken assumption that all three stand on equal narrative footing, never fully recovers once Harry's gaze lingers a second too long on Hermione's hand, her voice, her absence. Jealousy does not need to explode to do damage. It can simply erode. The famous golden trio becomes, in the quiet spaces, a lopsided triangle whose emotional gravity is always skewed toward the pair. Other relationships warp around that center of mass. Ginny's crush meets a wall earlier. Cho's brief canon arc never quite ignites. Even Sirius and Lupin find that their godson's confidences are filtered first through Hermione's analysis before reaching them. The love story, while never purely romantic melodrama, inevitably overshadows friendships and themes that once had room to breathe. The war narrows into a corridor lit by their shared intellect and shared fear. And then there is the body count. A more coordinated Harry-Hermione unit almost certainly prevents some deaths. A better evacuation plan at the Department of Mysteries, more rigorous occlumency drills before Snape, contingency protocols at Hogwarts that mean fewer students die in the final siege. Yet that same efficiency paints a target. Voldemort, recognizing the fortress they have built inside one another, focuses his cruelty. Attacks are designed to separate them, to force impossible choices. Lives may be saved on the margins, only to be lost in new, more intimate traps. The emotional calculus is no simpler. Is this Harry happier or merely rearranged in his suffering? To be loved and chosen so early gives him an anchor canon Harry never fully has. The cupboard under the stairs is not the end of the story, but the prologue to a relationship that tells him, repeatedly, that he is worth meticulous effort. Yet that same bond becomes a new fault line. Every scar he takes feels like a debt to Hermione. Every risk she runs feels like his personal indictment. Trauma does not vanish. It acquires a focal point. So, was this world better or just different? The answer resists grading. This is not an upgrade to canon, not a moral improvement charted in fewer graves and cleaner headlines, but a mirror held at a slightly different angle, catching new shadows on the same faces, new glints of power in the same eyes. The Slytherin timeline taught us that changing who raises Harry remakes the war. This quieter divergence shows that changing who he loves and when remakes the interior battlefield. The question that follows is not whether we prefer it, but what it reveals when the next, harsher fracture line arrives. Rewinding the tape, a slow-motion recap of the divergence. So we rewind slowly through the altered reel. Each year a frame, each frame bent a few degrees off the canon track by one quiet, stubborn truth. Harry fell in love with Hermione before he had language for it. In this timeline, that first anchor never snaps. It drags everything else. Year 1 is the troll and the vow. A terrified, furious boy stands over a girl in a wrecked bathroom and realizes that losing her would be worse than dying himself. The world thinks the golden trio is born that night. They are wrong. What is actually forged is a private oath in the dark. He will keep her safe, whatever it costs. From there, every corridor is walked with new vigilance, every risk weighed against the image of her broken on cold stone. Year 2 distills that fear into silence and stone. Hermione's petrified body becomes his first true battlefield. He sits by her bed and whispers strategies to a girl who cannot hear him. Promises, apologies, plans for a future he is no longer sure the world will permit. That whispered monologue over unmoving curls is the moment love hardens from crush into methodical certainty. The diary is destroyed, but the more important artifact is internal. The memory of talking to a girl who could not answer back. Year 3 stretches that bond through time itself. The time turner makes them co-conspirators in a secret chronicle, looping hours together until their movements develop a strange soul resonance. Two shadows stepping in perfect counterpoint. Ron is present, then absent, then peripheral, watching as shared danger and repeated, stolen hours make Harry and Hermione's partnership feel less like friendship and more like a blueprint for a life. Year 4 adds jealousy as a contaminant in the mix. The Yule Ball is no longer comic awkwardness. It is a study in misalignment. Harry, watching her descend the staircase on someone else's arm, finally understands that love can be a weapon being polished in the dark, turned against the one who feels it. His Triwizard choices skew towards showcasing her brilliance, deferring to her counsel with almost tactically lethal trust. Ron, excluded from the unspoken calculus, begins to feel the edges of exile. Year 5 converts emotion into open rebellion. Dumbledore's distance creates a vacuum that Harry and Hermione fill together, co-architects of Dumbledore's army. Rather than student and adjunct, she is not merely the logistics officer of resistance. She is its moral and intellectual co-sovereign. Ron oscillates between ally and afterthought, while Dumbledore's role shifts from omniscient guardian to occasionally thwarted strategist, watching a pair of teenagers build a parallel authority structure under his own roof. Year 6 and Year 7 are the long, dark corridor to war. Horcrux research becomes their shared obsession, a private curriculum in grim magic that Dumbledore only partially controls. The Locket's visions are crueler here, weaponizing their unspoken feelings, showing Harry futures where he lets her die, and others where he chooses her over the world. The tent dance almost becomes confession. It breaks off not from lack of desire, but from terror of what naming this would cost. When the fracture finally comes, it is not just Ron who leaves. A version of their innocence walks out with him. And then the forest, the look they share before he goes to die, is the entire alternate timeline compressed into a single held breath. Troll vows, hospital wing whispers, time loop confidences, ballroom resentments, DA councils, locket torments, half-finished dances, a masterpiece to be molded and never quite finished. He walks away not because he loves her less, but because loving her first taught him what it means to choose. This is where our guided tour nears its end, but the thought experiment does not. In the silence after the last frame, you decide whether they confess on that final night, whether Ron ever fully steps back inside the fortress of their bond, whether Dumbledore's miscalculations are forgiven or merely survived. The Slytherin timeline asked what happens when Harry is engineered as a ruler. This quieter divergence asks what happens when he is anchored as a lover. From here, the war is over, but your version of its aftermath is only beginning. Your turn in the pensieve. Engage, rewrite, and decide. From here, the war is over in this timeline, but only in the way any war ever ends, with unanswered questions, and a battlefield that has moved inside the survivors' heads. The external plot resolves, the internal campaign is just beginning, and that campaign now belongs to you. So you decide, with methodical certainty. In your version, do Harry and Hermione actually end up together, or does the pressure of prophecy and expectation fracture that early soul resonance into something quieter and more complicated? Does Ron stay at their side as brother-in-arms and reluctant third point of a lopsided triangle, or does he drift to a different orbit, still loved but no longer central to the fortress of their bond? Is this altered world kinder, or is it merely differently broken? Its cruelty redirected, its casualties rearranged, its silences deeper in the dark. To make that decision real, anchor it in one scene. Choose a single canon moment and rewrite it under this premise. Perhaps it is the troll in the bathroom, where an 11-year-old boy who has already decided that Hermione Granger is his first real person refuses to wait for teachers and throws himself between her and the club with a desperation that is not yet named, as love. Perhaps it is the Yule Ball where he never looks at Cho at all, because his eyes are tracking Hermione's every movement, calculating what it would cost Ron and the war to admit what has been true since the train. Perhaps it is the tent dance, no longer a consolation prize, but a confession both of them are too disciplined to voice. Describe that one scene in the comments as if you were writing the novel itself. The dialogue shifts, the body language, the new fault lines, or new repairs. Not they get together earlier, but how and when and at what emotional price to everyone else in the room. If you build worlds on the page, take this outline and turn it into fan fiction. A slow burn that begins with a chocolate frog on the Hogwarts Express, or a tactically lethal partnership that weaponizes Hermione's logic and Harry's instincts against every adult who underestimates them. If you work in images, sketch the troll fight, the Time Turner nights, the forest goodbye where she is the last face he sees before walking to his death. If you live for meta, map the branches of this alternate timeline like a war chart, where Ron peels away, where Dumbledore loses authority, where Voldemort realizes, too late, that love has made his enemy a weapon being polished in the dark. And if this experiment in early love interests you, the pensieve is deep. Imagine Harry raised not by the Dursleys, but by another family entirely. Imagine Hermione sorted into Ravenclaw and watching him from a distance. Imagine Ron as the chosen one, bearing the weight Harry escaped. Tell me which emotional variable you want stressed next. Friendship, ambition, envy, guilt. Because it all begins, again and again, in the corridor of the Hogwarts Express. An alpine wind still clings to Harry's too big clothes. The compartment is a temporary fortress against a world he does not yet trust. The door slides open. A girl with wild hair and a bossy voice steps in, asks about a toad, and frowns at his broken glasses. In that instant, 1,000 different stories ignite like wand sparks in the dark. This was one of them. The next one is already forming, somewhere in your head, right now.